the baton is in motion.
Mm-hmm.
And Fawn is one of these people who is receiving the baton.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think about this transition that's happening, you had the Thomas Kellers passing the torch to the next generation. And there was this whole new set of people who are coming up. Gabriel Abdullahi receiving the torch from Marcus Samuelson.
Mm-hmm.
The late Jamal James Kent Hospitality is being taken over by Charlie Mitchell, the chef formerly of Clover Hill. There is this moment of torch passing and this generational shift that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Fawn is emblematic of a real sense of change where a company like Uncle Nearest can start this new pathway, setting forth a new path by creating a business that is well-respected, symbol of excellence, but also creating opportunity for the next generation of distillers and the next generation of business leads. So as I was walking back over, I was just thinking about the way that Fawn is emblematic of a generational shift and that the power structure is changing and is allowing for growth and progress in a new generation of distilleries and spirits, and even just the way we think about cocktails or the way we write about the history of spirits is interesting to me.
Well, it's the way we're also storytelling now. And that's what I love about this series is each episode sort of builds on itself, where you're like, oh, wow, this is what these chefs are talking about. And this is the shifts. And this is how media is talking about food. All of this progress, all of this change is really layering onto itself. And I think there's always been a passing of the baton, but I don't think culture has been as open as it is now. As many challenges as there are that we continue to experience as a society, there's an opening and there's a willingness and there's an acceptance for people of different backgrounds, for people of different storied histories to take the throne, so to speak. And, from past generations of primarily European or white male dominated roles.
I'm not sure if it's taking the throne. I feel like it's an acknowledgement that there are many thrones.
I love that.
There doesn't have to be one. There's room for everybody. And this one beautiful thing about progress is as you see more people, and then you realize that this scarcity mindset doesn't make sense.
It's detrimental.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's detrimental to everyone.
It's a shrinking.
Yeah.
And by opening the aperture, we see all of these different possibilities. You see this panorama of possibilities. And that's what's exciting and something that I'm hoping that this series shows that, wait a second, all of these people in all of these different industries are working on their own pathway towards change. And by taking a piece of each of those, we can continue to shape progress. In a lot of cases, it surfaces more questions. And by all means, I don't think this series answers all of them. It allows us to challenge perceptions because we have more data and we have more information to show that, yes, people have to start to pay more for cultural foods. They can't say Indian food and Mexican food has to be cheap. We can start to challenge those ideas and challenge those perceptions and give society the language to change those mindsets as well.
Yeah. It goes back to fundamentally something that you said in the past is in order to be critical, you have to be in community. And when you're in community, you have depth and you have insight and you're educated and you know what is actually going on. That's the hope for this series. But, we had to have on Fawn Weaver, founder and CEO of Uncle Nearest. When we thought about someone in the beverage space, I think you and I unanimously said, we have to have Fawn.
Got to have Fawn Weaver.
She not only is leading this charge by really just being so authentically and true to herself, but she's bringing so many others with her as well. Not only on the Uncle Nearest side of the business and their other ventures, but also with their investment arm with Grant Sidney.
Fawn Weaver is a transformational figure. And when we were thinking about who are the right people, we really wanted to center on people who are transformational. And she is changing so much of the beverage industry and giving it a new breath and new light. And by authenticity, being the benchmark. I love what you just said about she is so much herself. And that too is transformational, especially when we've heard from so many people who said, oh, I was insecure about my food. She's very secure. She's very who she is. And I think that can be very inspiring for young leaders to see the way that she has run the business, the way Grant Sidney is giving all of these new entrepreneurs opportunities and using that playbook as a means to go forward.
And I always say this about the podcast, whether you're a chef, whether you're a restaurateur, whether you're a beverage executive, you can learn from each of these figures and how they are leading their organizations. Chefs can learn about being your truest self by hearing from Fawn. Beverage executives can learn from Daniel Hume and Elena Regadas of how they are facing successes and challenges. These conversations are not in a silo for just specific categories of the business. They all layer on to each other. And ultimately, as we talk about so much, if we are all in community with each other, all boats rise.
Yeah.
As the tides do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a constellation. We've talked to some true stars that are making a new universe. And that's a very exciting way to go forward into the next year of hospitality and a new phase of hospitality that is more inclusive, more diverse, more sustainable, allows people to be themselves, allows for collaboration. And ultimately, when you have all of those things, innovation is right next door.
You're listening to Effects of Change, a Bon Appetit and On the Pass original series about progress. Co-hosted by Jamila Robinson, editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit, and myself, Gabriel Ornelas, creator and host of On the Pass.
Now let's hear from Fawn Weaver, founder and CEO of Uncle Nearest.
My approach to storytelling is finding the through line that everyone can find themselves in the story in some way, shape, or form. Because our country is an experiment. We have made a lot of mistakes. We're still figuring a lot out. None of us have it all together. None of us know the true right way to do anything. We're figuring out what right is to us as a group of people, as Americans, as a country. And so when I am telling a story, I am looking at speaking to everyone in some way, shape, or form. I think that we all have certain through lines that resonates with all of us. I don't want to ever open my mouth and only be speaking to one group of people. That's a waste of my breath as far as I'm concerned. And so my storytelling, whenever I'm approaching it, is always, how do I tell this story truthfully, authentically, but do it in such a way where everyone can either find themselves in the story or at least resonate with it because they know someone who is like a character I'm speaking of, or they've experienced a situation that I am sharing and things of that nature. So that's my approach. And my approach is also unapologetic. I am not looking to sugarcoat anything. I'm not wrapping anything in a bow. I'm not tiptoeing over any kind of eggshells. This is what it is, but I think you can do both. I think you can be unapologetic and authentic and a truth teller and share stories that bring everyone in. I try to convince people they don't need mentors. I think it is a crutch that people are using. Mentors are unnecessary as far as I'm concerned. And I can only speak from my own experience. I never had any mentors. I have surrounded myself with brilliant people, a lot of people smarter than me, but they're not my mentors. I just have done well with surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me, right? And so I think that for a lot of people, they're waiting on the mentor that is going to lead them, guide them, give them the direction. I'm like, listen, all these biographies that are out there that I've read, what you need is already in there. And so I can't say that what I do is mentorship. What I do is I live authentically as me, and then I share what I learn in real time. Now, whoever wants to pick up those gems, pick them up. But I'm not going to spoon feed them to anyone. And so my approach to it is just being open and transparent and saying, this is what it looks like. This is what I did. This is what worked. This is what I did. This is what didn't work. This is the advice I listened to. that I wish I hadn't. This is the advice I discarded, and it was the best decision I've ever made. And so I think that my way of mentoring is simply to share everything that I know. That's it. And in terms of shaping the industry, I think that success does that in every industry. It doesn't matter the race, the gender, the background. When people see success, and I don't know if other countries are as wired to care about success as America is, I just know we are. It's a very important thing to us. And so whenever someone succeeds against all odds in our country, it begins to reshape the industry that they're in because everyone begins to try to reverse engineer that success. So I'll give you a really good example. When I came into the industry, every single person leading one of the spirit conglomerates were a white male across the board. Uncle Nearest began succeeding in their boardrooms. I was joking because people would come to me and they would tell me, yeah, we talked about you again in our, in the boardroom today and again and again. I was like, if y'all would focus more on you and less on me, you might actually get more done. I've had calls that go, we just had an emergency meeting in Paris about you. Why? Y'all, why? Because listen, if you are doing your absolute best, then what I'm doing shouldn't matter. I'm not paying attention to anybody else in the industry. And I mean no one else. The only thing I pay attention to is if I see folks that are making mistakes that I can capitalize off of because either they're not pivoting fast enough because they're too big to pivot or because they are ignoring market trends because they're looking at what's on paper and I'm actually in the field, boots on the ground. And so I'm getting information in real time from retailers, from consumers that they might be getting data, 90 days later. Well, I've already had it and pivoted, right? And so that is where I am seeing a lot of change happen is because so many people are following what it is that we're doing. And I would probably say 3 years into Uncle Nearest coming onto the scene, 3 of the 6 spirit conglomerates had put women in the CEO role. Now, let's be clear, they still have them reporting in the chairmen of the boards that are all white males. However, who can fire them? However, we'll applaud the little steps. And so, yeah, progress. We will applaud the progress. I wouldn't say that I am shaping it, but I do believe that people watching me are making adjustments based on them trying to reverse engineer what we have done. For me, if someone rises up to challenge me, I love the idea of the competition. Who wants to run a race in which nobody else is close? I'm not looking at anyone as competition. I'm like, come on, rise up, challenge. And I think that challenging is good for all of us. It's not just good for those who are rising up to challenge, but it's good for those who are being challenged. I think a lot of people are just afraid of competition. I don't know why. I just don't have that same fear. It's like, okay, you figured out how to do that. We were doing that. You figured out how to do it. And you just figured out how to do it better. But guess what? I'm the one who came up with that anyway. So I'm going to come up with something else. And now you're going to be chasing me again on the new thing. I remember when we first came out with Uncle Nearest Rye and our label was blue. It had accents of blue. And I remember a reporter saying to me, so what was the mindset going behind that? Because everyone that's come before you has used green. And I said, well, why is everyone using green? Rye isn't even green. So one person will do something, everyone will jump on that trend, and I just don't jump on the trend. I'm like, well, I don't even understand where the trend came from, why you all are all doing it, but I'm going to just be over here and do me. I never allowed anyone to mold me or shape me. I left home so early. I didn't go to college until I was grown. And so I never had to reverse being molded into someone who I wasn't. I think the challenge for a lot of people is that they really have to go back to their 7-year-old self and say, who was that person? Who was I created to be? Who I was born to be? If you look at a 7-year-old, seriously pay attention to them and don't give them any guardrails, they'll tell you exactly who they are. Everyone has to just go back to that. I tell people all the time, I'm a fully realized woman at 7 years old. That's all I am now. I've learned a lot of lessons along the way, and those lessons have helped me. They've propelled me. But what I haven't allowed them to do is to change who I was always created to be. If you are an executive chef and say, for instance, what you love is authentic soul food, let me tell you, I'm still waiting for that chef to come to the forefront who unapologetically embraces soul food. And they don't call it Southern, they call it soul. I grew up on soul food. And so I was just in Houston. There's a restaurant there called The Taste Kitchen. And my makeup artist, he and I have been together for 10 years. And he also does like Jada Pinkett and Alicia Keys and all the rest of that stuff. And he ate it. And you would have thought that he had died and partially gone to heaven. And so he's doing this video for his social media. And he goes, guys, this is just outrageous. This is just outrageous. And he's having, fried catfish and grits. But it was so unapologetically soulful that that's what he was responding to. And so if you are a person who you grew up on that kind of food, it's the food that you enjoy, but then you grew up under French chefs. And so you've added all these different elements to your cooking that you've picked up from all these different people. Like the French chefs, all the cursing and throwing pots that they do that these other chefs feel like they need to do, that is so unnecessary to cook. I'm sorry, but throwing pots and cursing people out is not necessary for your food to come out great. I'm just saying, right? And so you have people who are genuinely kind, who genuinely love people and have picked up that trait because of the kitchens they came through. If they would reverse that and go back to who they were when they were 7 years old, if you were the kid helping everybody out on the playground, that's who you are. So why would you lord over them in the kitchen? No, still be that person who wants to help your sous chef, who wants to help your line cooks, who wants to help everybody. Hell, who wants to help the dishwasher? Because no kitchen runs without the dishwasher. It really is a matter of doing the work of figuring out who was I when I was 7, when I was 8. And if you're so far removed from that person, go back and ask people who knew you then. Go back and ask your siblings. If I didn't go to the school I went to, if I didn't have the training, if you were to just see me at 7 or 8 years old, what would you say I would be doing? And what would you say my personality would be? And then see how that rings true to your soul. So in the spirits industry, if you talk to consumers and you mention Bacardi, they're going to instinctively think of a rum. If you mention Bacardi to anyone in the industry, none of us even think about their rum. We think about the fact that they own Patron tequila. We think about the fact that they own Douce cognac and Grey Goose vodka. That's how we see it. So Uncle Nearest is simply going from being a brand on a bottle, although it will continue to be that, to being this umbrella company in which every spirit that is in the house helps to still elevate the legacy of Nearest Green, because Uncle Nearest will continue to be that umbrella that is over everything. But even as we are looking at the different stories that we are telling, like I was doing my Love and Whiskey book tour stop in St. Louis, I was sharing just a little bit of the background of why we were going into cognac. And I'm keeping the story very close to my vest without question. But one of the things I said is I said, if you think the story of Nearest Green and Jack Daniel is unbelievable, wait until you hear the story of cognac and why Americans are the number one consumers by far of cognac and why it is as much an American spirit as it is a French spirit. That story has never been told. I don't even know that people know that story. So the same deep dive that I went into with Nearest Green with Uncle Nearest, I did the exact same deep dive with cognac. The difference is this time I knew what I was looking for. So I was able to do it in a year versus 7 years. If the storyline behind that wasn't absolutely extraordinary, I wouldn't be bothered with it. And so my company is a company that will continue to tell amazing stories, that will continue to cement the legacies of people that you're not necessarily expecting. On our cognac story, we're again cementing the legacies of some African Americans, but we're also cementing the legacy of some white Frenchmen that have never gotten the credit they deserve. I think that the story of Equiano is one of the best brand stories of all time, hands down. I can't wait till the entire world knows that brand story. I mean, when I share the brand story on their behalf, I get chills. Like, it's not even my brand. And I get chills telling the story of Equiano and what they've done there. I think it's absolutely brilliant. I find great honor in the fact that God has allowed me to live this particular life, right? There could be, I was sharing with someone in the airport yesterday because there's all these flight delays and everyone's so frustrated. I'm like, I don't know how you can be in a terminal and be upset because you're not the one who's in the rain loading the bags, nor are you the person who's cleaning the toilet you just used, nor are you the person who's serving you the drink you just had. You're literally the one that gets to fly. And I think that we forget these things. And so I live with an extreme gratitude that this was the life God chose for me. And when I look at it overall, I really am, as a person, I am an introvert who that if I could have written my own life and said, this is what I will do, I would be an absolute mastermind that was like the Wiz in Oz, right? I literally would be behind the curtain, behind a computer. I would never be out in the public. I would never keep my husband jokes that, if Fawn had it her way, she'd be a hermit. He's not wrong. So all of the traveling that I do, all of the talking I do, all of the being out there with people, that's actually draining to me. But I feel so fortunate and so grateful that that is what God chose for me. I appreciate y'all. I appreciate that you share the work, and hopefully it does empower other people to just lean into, not to be like me, lean into authentically them.
Oof, if there's one thing Fawn's going to do, she's going to drop gems.
Something the listeners of On the Pass will have heard me say a lot is the success of a show or the success of any episode is really great takeaways. Not every episode is an exhaustive education on a specific topic. Not every episode is going to change your life. But the goal is always to have people think differently, ask new questions, learn new things, and have incredible takeaways, and hopefully inspire them in a lot of ways. And so as it pertains to this series, what have been some of your biggest takeaways from some of the incredible things that our guests have covered?
Well, I think it's important to go back to the beginning, that this is a series that was framed around conversations. It emerged out of conversations. And to hear all of the guests from Elena Reales and Sean Sherman and Claire Eichenbach, they're all starting new conversations, whether that is about sustainability, how do you move a business forward, how do we continue to evolve cultural competency amongst our audiences and amongst our staffs, amongst our consumer base. These are all things that we can help create more conversations.
Easy.
One of the things we have talked about frequently is that when we're discussing sustainability or the role of the chef, often we are talking to each other. We are not being more cross-functional in the ways that we communicate these conversations. So the biggest thing that I've found has been ways to continue to create dialogue, using platforms to open two-way conversations, being open to feedback, and being open to new perspectives. Some of these conversations we came in thinking we knew exactly what we wanted to talk about, and often they pulled us in completely different directions. And it's the beauty of a conversation is to be able to open mindsets. And the nexus of our conversations was that no one was talking about progress. And in the time that it has taken to record these conversations, analyze these conversations, things are still evolving. They're still changing. And I think that's a beautiful thing. The industry is not fluid. It's always in motion.
Izzy, my hope is that people learn new things. I think especially the inter-industry and our friends and our colleagues will go, well, I've heard Daniel say this before, or I've heard Sean say this, or maybe on a panel I heard Tim say this, but I haven't seen it put together in this way. And I think getting back to what you were saying is creating more opportunities and more platforms that bring these conversations together, that bring them to the world. I think we need to celebrate the progress. And that was kind of the impetus and sort of the start and the catalyst for this, but also think about, okay, how do we keep going? Because, it's the same thing with awards. When a chef or a restaurant wins an amazing award, what happens the next day? You keep working. Right. You keep working. Keep pushing. You keep going forward. I loved hearing Sean Sherman say, as many problems and as much as there is this need for this conversation on indigenous foodways, but he did say, we've actually gotten a lot done. the fact that we're having these conversations is a positive thing. We just need more
Absolutely.
of it.
Absolutely. We need more of it. And I think that we have to recognize that even the start of a conversation, just knowing that you're talking about it, when you start talking about climate, when you start talking about policy, then that turns the gears so that you can bring more people in. So much has been done on the Indigenous front, and Sean Sherman's work has been so vital to so many communities and will continue to expand. And I think we have an opportunity to do that with so many other topics. How can we continue to not stare at a problem, but look at the kind of legislation that we might need? Who are the lobbyists that we need to engage? Who are the people that we need to find connections with on a global stage? If we have the same goals as food education with UNESCO, if we have the same goals as a state program, we may have the same goals as a university. We want to be sure that we are engaged in those conversations, that we are making those connections. And I think an important takeaway is that we don't have all the answers. A lot of these conversations provoked more questions. And I think that that's a really great thing to be able to continue to spark more questions, because that's how all of this started in the first place.
And I think to create effective change, you have to ask questions. You have to challenge the norm. You have to challenge the habits and the processes that are already in place. And so I think every guest that we've had on this series, they wake up every day asking the questions that they ultimately need to. How do I become a more effective leader? How do I get this message to more people? How do I challenge myself and my team to be a more sustainable business, to be more sustainable as it pertains to the climate?
Sure. And I also think they are looking for opportunities to create new leaders. If we are answering those questions, if we are posing those questions, then we are also looking for opportunities to pull together a cohort who can help solve problems, help engage the public. All of these roles are interconnected, from the chefs to media, the awards system, and then also outward facing to our communities and to our consumers.
You lead an organization at Condé Nast, Bon Appetit and Epicurious. How do you think about who you're elevating ultimately? Because it has to be something that's on your mind. And I think it's something that we all need to think about as we move forward more into these conversations is, who are we sort of ordaining to be the messenger? Because I think that's really important.
That's so important. It's a very difficult question because so many people want thought leaders to be perfect. And can you be a respected leader if maybe you aren't available all the time? Maybe you don't have all the answers, and people and consumers are often looking for solutions.
Maybe you're a mother like Elena and she has to take care of her family.
She's got a family. But I do think it's important for us to engage people and have these luminaries like Elena or like a Daniel who talking about these topics, and then opening up the door for more people to be in community on those topic areas. They don't have to be the sole spokespeople for change. I think we have to elevate topic areas rather than people, and those people gravitate. And I don't think we have to, as an organization, we don't have to come in and be the kingmakers. We have to just bring people together who are like-minded and put those issues out in front of the universe. And then also bring in other organizations that might be working on those topic areas. I think the James Beard Foundation has done a great job of bringing to light with their leadership awards people who are doing this great work in the community. So you'll see someone like a Farmer John from Philadelphia who is doing this community farming, or the Champions of Change that the World's 50 Best is working with. So these people who are all over the world working to make the industry better are getting a platform at those awards and being able to engage with the best chefs on the planet. We're all like-minded in wanting a sustainable, equitable system. And that takeaway ends up being we need to just do more of that in connecting those people so that they're not just at the 50s, they're also at the Beards. They're also at other events that are happening all over the world throughout the year.
Yeah, I think, yes, it's always a great opportunity to lift an individual, but let's make sure we're lifting these topics and these issues and these solutions as well at the forefront. It's something you and I talked about recently was let's also not put unrealistic expectations on some of these leaders, because I think it's quite challenging. Just as an example with a chef speaks so loudly already through their art, through their food.
Absolutely.
And you can already tell by how they're doing things, how they potentially are choosing ingredients, how they're supporting their staff, how they think about sustainability. But sometimes in certain cases, to also expect them to be the community driver and the leader and the celebrity spokesperson, for some people, that's a reality. For others, it's a stretch.
That's a real challenge. I mean, and that takes a particular kind of talent. And look, you can give people storytelling coaching and teach them how to do that, but not everybody even wants to be in that position.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I told you about the conversation I had with Mauro Calagreco just a few weeks ago. And, he said the role of the chef in the 90s was really just to get out of the kitchen. But he said now, and he did say we're expected to be diplomats and we're expected to be all of these different things. Some chefs, that will be very natural. Others, it won't. But there is an opportunity, even if you just have an amazing restaurant and you're not in front of the camera and you're not interested in being that global leader, you're affecting your team.
Right.
You're teaching the next generation
absolutely
of how to run a business, how to source sustainably, how to nurture a guest. So I think every chef has the opportunity to have tremendous impact.
Absolutely. And to be part of a global community.
Yes.
That's what's exciting to me, is that opportunity there doesn't always have to be the role of the chef. That can be the role of the journalist, the NGO leader, the leader of the foundation.
Mm-hmm. Something else that I thought was really interesting that was this common thread that sort of weaved its way through all the conversations was, whether it was with Fawn Weaver, with Daniel Hume, or Sean Sherman, is this idea of really finding your truest self. It's something that on my show, we've talked to so many people about, where they may have gone down a path of studying traditional French or traditional things, but then really locked into kind of who they are and their heritage. And I think there's this common thread of just like, lean into who you are and potentially amazing things can happen and you could be even more creative. And it's something that I felt like was this overarching theme.
It's something I think about all the time.
I think this next generation, so to speak, of chefs who came from some of the greats, like Daniel, like Mauro and others, but they're in sort of their 30s, maybe their 20s. I think they are maybe one of the first generations who has that permission, like you're talking about, to say, I feel confident enough to go and do my cuisine and do my cultural food, whatever that is, and have an audience, but also investors and potentially business people who really want to back that, where I feel like 20, 30 years ago, it's still very difficult, but it was much more challenging.
I agree with that. And I think it's only been in the last few years that you're starting to see chefs take that lead and have that permission. It has been a real generational shift. I don't know if in the industry, we always had that permission to know that things could change. Change was also slow. But now I think one of the biggest takeaways that I've found is that change takes will. It doesn't always take a lot of time, but it does take will. And to see the leaders who have been throughout effects of change, Fawn Weaver, Tim Burke-Webb, Claire, Melina, they have all set forth a pathway and said, this is what we're doing. And and that change hasn't taken a lot of time, but they've been able to innovate. And the path for growth is going to be much smaller. It's going to be, I think, a lot less of a challenge going forward.
Yeah. And I think in everyone that you mentioned who's been in this series, we need the combination of their organizations and the incredible work that they're doing, but also our education system. And that's kind of what Rupa was talking about as well. And it's amazing to see places like the CIA embracing cultural diversity and embracing different storytelling, giving more depth to its students, I think will only benefit us all. But it also goes back to how does media tell stories as well? And I think that's a super important component is like, how is our education system set up? But also, how are we telling those stories and talking about these different narratives in a positive, in a meaningful way?
As media organizations, we have to be the gatekeepers of cultural competence. We have to ask questions like, why are we italicizing non-English words? But if it's a French word, we don't italicize it. But if it's Vietnamese, we do. We have to be vigilant about the way that we use language. I would also challenge our journalism schools to be sure that we're covering these topics. I know so many people who fell into food writing because they were career changers. Maybe they were English majors, maybe a lot of people who weren't quite sure what they wanted to do. But I would love to see food writing to have the same care and curricula as you would with sports or with entertainment or with politics. Here we have a topic that shapes society and intersects with everything we do. And how inspiring could it be for journalism students? They had a specialty in food writing that covered immigration, climate change, business, the economy, foodways, and covered all of these societal shifts, elections through food. How much more educated our writers would be. You know, sometimes we hear about from chefs asking if food writers have ever worked in a restaurant. Does that help you become a better food writer? And my argument to that is, I don't think that's true. I think you have to have first-rate journalism skills, first-rate interviewing skills. And if we teach those topics and helping understand the economy, we could do better in telling our audiences about the margins, about how, one, why restaurants matter, but why your food may cost more, why you may not be able to get this ingredient in your neighborhood. Why are we not talking about flavor? We aren't talking about how legislation impacts school lunch and all of these education pathways, which this is the work of storytelling. I think the industry needs us as much as we need them. And sometimes we do want, we want to tell you about the best restaurants and the best bars and bakeries and whatnot, but there is a component of service journalism that is educating the public about some things that they may not be clear about.
I think Rupa said it so well, is to have a foundational level of empathy for the humanity of your subjects. And I think, yes, core competency, all of that, but also this deep empathy. If you're going to be a great storyteller, you have to really want to learn and want to understand and put yourself in the shoes, so to speak, of your subject. You mentioned consumers. What is your hope for the consumer who is just a passionate foodie?
It's a great question.
They're not a part of our industry in the way that we think about things, but is just passionate about food, knowing that it's one of the most intimate relationships that we have.
My hope for the consumer is that it gives some insight into the extraordinary creativity of chefs and the culinary industry. That what appears on your plate is a work of beauty, a work of art, but also, to your point, is very intimate. It's an act of love. So nice to have somebody cook something for you. And I think zooming in on that relationship of the people who create food for us and the experience that they want to share, the way that they want to take care of us. I think we know that when we're in the industry, but I'm not always sure if the consumer is completely aware that the people who are cooking for us really want a beautiful experience. So I'm hoping this series is illuminating. Sometimes we need to have a little bit more detail about what's happening in the kitchen. Restaurateurs are having trouble finding staff all over the world. I'm hoping that the consumer will be a little bit more patient, have patience, empathy, but also just appreciation that they have thought about the ingredients so deeply that they've chosen something very special for you. That's a really beautiful thing. It's like a little gift. And it's also remembering that it is an entire industry. It takes a lot of different kinds of people I hope the consumers see that the industry is evolving and that even our cultural foods may not taste like your grandma's, but there is an extraordinary amount of creativity that is going into the interpretation of ingredients. And I hope we can continue to share that.
Yeah, I hope that it inspires more meaning and more mindfulness about the food that we eat.
Mm-hmm.
And also, yes, you're talking about this deeper appreciation, but it's also like, people love to say you vote with your fork. But it's very true. And also as you listen to Sean and you listen to Daniel and you listen to all of our incredible guests, the amount of effort and love and passion, and that similar to this series, it's not a pursuit of perfection. It's a pursuit of progress. And let's continue to always remember that.
Yeah, I hope that that's a huge takeaway, that when they think about the industry, they are thinking about, yes, it is better. It's changing and it'll continue to change. We'll be having a completely different conversation about these topics a year from now. And I would love to continue to revisit these conversations because we're going to have more questions. In a year from now, we might have other kinds of answers, or we might come back and say, I'm sorry, Gabriel, you were completely wrong about that one.
I hope so. I mean,
Yeah.
I hope that's the case because again, that's progress, and
Absolutely.
that's evolution. And it's even like things as we look at awards, as you've said, and we heard from Claire, the audit just took place 4 years ago. And there's so much change and progress that's been made, but there's so much that will continue to happen a year from now, 5 years from now, 4 years from now.
The results are just starting to play out.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very short window, and we have to be cognizant of that. Not everything is going to be an overnight change. Sometimes we have to exercise a little bit of patience and acknowledgement of, oh, okay, here's where we were in 2021. Here's where we are in 23, 24, 25, and then we can revisit again.
Mm-hmm. This series gives me a lot of hope because amidst the difficult challenges taking place globally, hearing from these leaders and deeply now understanding the work that they're doing inspires me to want to continue to do this work and be a part of this community and continue to uplift incredible people. And that's a big part of my mission. And I know it is for you as well, is like, how do we continue to bring people together? How do we continue to create a deeper community amongst our peers and just consumers as well?
Absolutely. We think about that all the time. You and I talk about this all the time. People love saying, food brings us together. We're going to bring all these people together. But what does that really look like in real time? What are the steps that you do to make that happen? Is that a forum? Is that a conversation? Is that a video? Is that an event? If we can start to say, we need to shape events around sustainability or shape around indigenous food culture, then who are the people we need to bring together? I get very inspired as well when I think about when you are at one of these events, whether it's Best New Restaurants at Bon Appetit or if it's at World's 50 Best, at any of the events, there is a smaller community that's forming, that's part of a bigger community. And then you realize that, oh, we're talking about the same thing. And my gosh, talk to me when you're in Mexico City. Come say hello when you're in New York. Or my gosh, I'm going to be in LA for 4 days. Let's sit down and have a meal together and have those conversations. That's making that community happen in real time. And if we can leverage that power, that interest, that desire for progress, then we'll see that effective change.
Effects of Change is produced by myself, Gabriel Ornelas, edited, mixed, and mastered by Dylan Agajanian, with original music by Dylan Agajanian.